Graduation day arrived with perfect blue skies and my heart swelling with pride. Marcus stood among his classmates in those ridiculous caps and gowns, beaming as Principal Henderson prepared to read selected letters from graduating seniors. My husband David squeezed my hand, both of us glowing with parental joy as our 18-year-old son prepared to walk across that stage. Henderson's voice boomed across the packed auditorium as he began reading Marcus's letter. "Dear teachers, classmates, and family." The words floated over hundreds of proud parents clutching tissues and cameras. My chest tightened with emotion as Marcus's thoughtful words filled the space. This moment represented everything we'd worked toward for 18 long years of homework battles and soccer practices. "I want to thank Mrs. Rodriguez for believing in me when I struggled with calculus." Henderson continued reading. Around us, parents nodded knowingly while their own children fidgeted in uncomfortable chairs. David's eyes misted as he listened to our son's mature reflection on his high school journey. The letter captured Marcus's growth from that shy kindergartner into this confident young man ready for college. Marcus thanked his debate team coach, his chemistry lab partner Sarah, and his best friend Jake, who'd stuck by him through everything. Each word painted a picture of a grateful teenager who understood the village that had raised him. David and I exchanged proud glances as our son's wisdom echoed through the gymnasium. These acknowledgments revealed the depth of character we'd hoped to instill in him. Henderson's voice warmed as he reached the family section. "To my mother, thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." Tears spilled down my cheeks as 300 people heard my son's public declaration of love. David's arm tightened around my shoulders while cameras flashed across the auditorium. This felt like the culmination of every sacrifice we'd made. "You worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table and still found time to help with homework every night." The principal's voice carried Marcus's gratitude to the very back rows, where grandparents strained to attune the roll. Here, my throat constricted with overwhelming emotion as my son's words validated years of exhaustion and worry. David wiped his own eyes, remembering those difficult times when money was tight and hope seemed distant. Henderson smiled as he continued reading about family adventures and life lessons learned around our dinner table. Marcus described camping trips where David taught him to fish and quiet evenings where I helped him through algebra problems. The letter painted our family as the picture of suburban happiness that everyone in that auditorium could relate to. We'd weathered storms together and emerged stronger, or so I believed. "Dad, you taught me what it means to be a good man through your example every single day." Principal Henderson's voice carried across the silent gymnasium as Marcus's tribute to David continued. My husband's chest swelled with visible pride while parents around us nodded approvingly. This public recognition of David's role as father validated his devotion to raising Marcus as his own son from the very beginning. The gratitude section wrapped up beautifully as Marcus thanked coaches, neighbors, and even our mailman, Mr. Thompson, for small kindnesses over the years. Henderson paused dramatically, building anticipation for what seemed like the letter's touching conclusion. David and I held hands tighter, both overwhelmed by our son's maturity and thoughtfulness. The entire auditorium buzzed with appreciation for such eloquent reflection from a teenager. "As I prepare for college, I carry all your lessons with me into this next chapter." Henderson read as the letter appeared to wind down. Parents throughout the gymnasium dabbed at their eyes while students shifted restlessly in their seats. The afternoon sun streamed through high windows, casting everything in golden light that seemed to bless this perfect moment. Our family felt complete and blessed beyond measure. But then Henderson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as his eyes scanned ahead to the letter's final lines. His practiced smile flickered for just a moment before he composed himself and continued reading. Something in his tone changed, though most people probably didn't notice the subtle shift. David and I remained oblivious, still basking in the glow of Marcus's beautiful tribute to our family. The principal cleared his throat and looked directly toward our section before reading the closing paragraph. "Finally, I want to address something that has weighed on my heart throughout high school." Henderson's voice carried a new tension that made several parents sit up straighter in their folding chairs. My stomach began to flutter with inexplicable anxiety as the mood in the auditorium somehow shifted. "I've discovered information about my family that has changed everything I thought I knew." Henderson continued reading Marcus's words. The applause that had punctuated earlier sections died away as people sensed something different approaching. David's hand grew clammy in mine while my heart started racing for reasons I couldn't quite identify. The letter was taking an unexpected turn that none of us had anticipated. Henderson hesitated briefly, his eyes finding our faces in the crowd before returning to the paper. After years of wondering why I looked nothing like my father, I finally found the courage to search for answers. The gymnasium fell completely silent except for the humming of overhead fans and distant traffic outside. My blood turned to ice as I realized where this was heading. Last month, I discovered documents that revealed the truth my mother has hidden from both of us for 18 years. Henderson's voice remained steady and professional, but I could see the discomfort in his posture as he continued reading. David's grip on my hand tightened painfully while confused murmurs rippled through the audience. The perfect graduation day was about to shatter into a million pieces. Principal Henderson looked up from the letter one more time, his eyes filled with something between sympathy and professional obligation. To David Miller, sitting in the third row, seat 12, he read slowly and clearly. I want you to know that while you raised me with love and devotion, genetic testing has confirmed that you are not my biological father. The words hung in the air like poisonous gas. The auditorium erupted into chaos as 300 people processed what they'd just heard. Gasps echoed from every corner while necks craned to locate the family being publicly destroyed. David's face went through a rainbow of emotions from confusion to realization to absolute devastation. His hand dropped from mine as though I'd suddenly burst into flames before his eyes. Every parent, teacher, and student turned to stare at our row as the truth detonated in that crowded space. David sat frozen like a statue while I felt my face burning with shame and terror. Marcus stood on the stage, his cap slightly askew, watching his family implode with what looked like satisfaction mixed with sadness. The perfect graduation had become a public execution of our marriage. Henderson's voice cut through the murmur as he finished reading the letter's conclusion. I hope someday we can rebuild our relationship based on honesty instead of lies. The principal folded the paper carefully, his face grave as he realized he'd just been the unwitting instrument of family destruction. The ceremony would have to continue, but nothing would ever be the same for any of us. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the gymnasium floor as hundreds of eyes tracked his movement. We're leaving, he whispered harshly without looking at me, his voice barely controlled. I scrambled to follow him as he pushed past other parents toward the exit. Behind us, the whispers grew louder while Marcus watched his father flee from the stage where he stood waiting for his diploma. The parking lot felt like a battlefield as David and I faced each other beside our car. 18 years, he said quietly, his voice shaking with rage and betrayal. 18 years I've been living a lie. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his keys while I stood helplessly watching the man I loved discover that his entire adult life had been built on deception. David, please let me explain, I begged, but his eyes held a coldness I'd never seen before in our marriage. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as other families began streaming from the building, some staring openly at us. There's nothing to explain, Claire, he said with devastating finality. You've explained everything perfectly clearly. He drove away without another word, leaving me stranded in that parking lot. That evening, I sat alone in our empty house as David's absence filled every room with accusation. Marcus came home hours later, his graduation cap dangling from his fingers like a wilted flower. We stared at each other across the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of family meals. Why did you do it that way? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I was tired of living the lie you created, Marcus answered, with a maturity that broke my heart. His young face looked older somehow, aged by the weight of secrets he'd carried alone. I found my birth certificate in your closet last month, along with the letters from my real father that you never told me about. The betrayal in his voice cut deeper than any knife could have. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're reading from and what time at Island. Let me know in the comments. The letters Marcus mentioned were hidden behind my winter coats, a secret I'd guarded for nearly 19 years. Thomas had written faithfully for the first 5 years of Marcus's life before finally giving up when I never responded. Those letters contained photos of a man whose jawline and green eyes were unmistakably reflected in my son's face. Marcus had found them all, along with the DNA test results I'd been hiding. I contacted him 3 weeks ago. Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was revealing. Thomas lives 2 hours away. He's married now with 2 daughters. But he never forgot about me. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed as I processed the fact that my son had been building a relationship with his biological father behind my back. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me photos of himself with a tall man whose resemblance was undeniable. "He's been paying child support into an account you never told me about," my son said quietly. "All these years you let David struggle financially while my real father sent money every month." The depth of my deception was finally being revealed in all its ugly complexity. "You don't understand the circumstances," I began, but Marcus held up his hand to stop me from speaking. "I understand that you were scared and young when you got pregnant. I understand that David was a good man who loved you." His voice carried wisdom beyond his 18 years as he continued. "But I don't understand how you could build our entire family on a lie." The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation as David returned with his brother Kevin to collect his belongings. They moved through our house like efficient strangers, packing 18 years of marriage into cardboard boxes. David avoided eye contact with me while Kevin shot disapproving glances in my direction. The life we'd built together was being dismantled before my eyes. "Where will you go?" I asked David as he folded clothes we'd bought together into suitcases. "Kevin's place for now," he answered without looking up from his packing. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings." The word divorce hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known it was inevitable from the moment Henderson read that letter aloud. Marcus helped David load boxes into the truck, the two of them working in silent coordination one last time. Watching them say goodbye felt like watching my son's childhood end in real time. David hugged Marcus tightly while my son whispered something I couldn't hear. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes, as 18 years of father-son relationship faced an uncertain future. That night, Marcus and I sat in our living room, surrounded by empty spaces where David's belongings used to be. "Do you hate me?" I asked my son, needing to know where we stood. "I don't hate you, Mom," he said after a long pause, "but I don't know if I can trust you anymore." His honesty hurt more than anger would have. The next morning brought reporters to our door as news of the graduation scandal spread through our small town. Marcus and I watched from behind closed curtains as camera crews set up on our lawn. Local families shattered by graduation letter revelation would become the headline that defined us. Our private pain had become public entertainment for strangers who knew nothing about our story. School officials called to apologize for the incident, claiming they'd had no idea what Marcus's letter contained. Principal Henderson had simply read what was handed to him without previewing the content. The district promised policy changes to prevent similar situations in the future. Their concern felt hollow when our family was already destroyed beyond repair. Friends and neighbors didn't know how to respond to our situation, so most simply avoided us altogether. The grocery store became a gauntlet of whispered conversations and pointed stares. Our mailbox filled with letters from strangers offering everything from judgment to sympathy. Some people called me brave for protecting my secret for so long, while others labeled me a liar and homewrecker. David moved into his own apartment across town, establishing a new life that didn't include me. He changed his phone number and blocked me on all social media platforms. The man who'd once promised to love me forever had erased me from his existence as completely as possible. 18 years of marriage meant nothing compared to the betrayal he felt. Marcus split his time between our house and visits with Thomas, building a relationship with the biological father he'd never known. Watching my son discover his genetic heritage felt like losing him piece by piece. Thomas was everything David wasn't: artistic, spontaneous, and unencumbered by the weight of deception. He offered Marcus a fresh start without the baggage of our family's lies. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly as David wanted to sever all ties as quickly as possible. He kept the house, and I moved into a small apartment downtown where nobody knew my story. The financial settlement was minimal since I'd hidden crucial information throughout our marriage. David's lawyer argued successfully that my deception had voided any claims to marital assets. Marcus graduated from high school without either David or me in attendance, having requested that we both stay away. He'd made his point publicly and didn't want any more drama surrounding his achievement. Thomas attended instead, sitting proudly in the audience as his son walked across the stage. The boy I'd raised was beginning his adult life with his real father's support. College acceptance letters arrived throughout the summer, but Marcus had already decided to take a gap year. He wanted time to process everything that had happened and to build his relationship with Thomas's family. The full scholarship to our state university would wait while my son figured out who he was beyond the lies that had shaped his childhood. David started dating someone new within months of our divorce being finalized. Sarah was a divorced teacher with 2 young children who had no complicated history to navigate. She represented the fresh start that David needed after 18 years of unknowingly living a lie. Their relationship moved quickly as he embraced the chance to build something honest and real. I took a job at a retail store across town where customers didn't recognize my face from news reports. The work was mindless and exhausting, but it kept me busy while I tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. My coworkers knew nothing about my past, and I planned to keep it that way. Starting over at 42 felt impossible some days. Thomas invited Marcus to spend Christmas with his family, an invitation that excluded me entirely. My son would experience holiday traditions with half-sisters he was just getting to know while I spent the day alone in my apartment. The family dinners and gift exchanges that had defined our Decembers were gone forever, replaced by awkward phone calls and careful text messages. Marcus applied to colleges near Thomas's city, making it clear that his future lay far from the town where we'd lived together. He was building a new life that barely included me, and I couldn't blame him for wanting distance from the woman who'd lied to him for 18 years. Our relationship might survive, but it would never be the same. David married Sarah in a small ceremony the following spring, creating the family he'd thought he'd had with me. Their wedding photos showed genuine happiness that I'd never seen in our own marriage pictures. Perhaps he'd always sensed something was wrong, but had chosen to ignore the signs. Now he could love freely without the shadow of deception hanging over everything. I started therapy to deal with the guilt and isolation that consumed my days and nights. Dr. Martinez helped me understand why I'd made the choices I did, but understanding didn't erase the damage I'd caused. 3 lives had been forever altered by my decision to build a family on lies. The ripple effects would continue for years to come. Marcus visited occasionally, but our conversations felt strained and careful as we navigated our new relationship dynamic. He called me Claire instead of Mom, creating distance that protected him from further disappointment. We met in public places like coffee shops where emotions could be contained and conversations could be ended easily if they became too intense or uncomfortable. The small town where we'd lived eventually moved on to newer scandals, but I remained a cautionary tale whispered among parents. "Remember the Miller family," they'd say when discussing the importance of honesty in marriage. My choices had become a lesson for others about the dangers of keeping secrets. The shame followed me everywhere despite my attempts to start fresh. David's relationship with Marcus slowly rebuilt over time, though it never quite returned to what it had been before. They met for dinner once a month, maintaining connection while acknowledging that their dynamic had fundamentally changed. The man who'd raised Marcus with love and devotion deserved better than the public humiliation he'd endured, and everyone knew it, including my son. Thomas proved to be everything I'd feared he would be, a devoted father who stepped seamlessly into Marcus's life. His daughters welcomed their older half-brother with enthusiasm, and Marcus thrived in this environment of honesty and acceptance. Watching from the outside, I could see the family my son was meant to have all along. 2 years after graduation, Marcus called to tell me he was engaged to his college girlfriend, Emma. The wedding would be small and intimate, including Thomas's family and David with his new wife. I wasn't invited, though Marcus offered to meet for coffee beforehand if I wanted to celebrate privately. The exclusion hurt, but I'd forfeited my right to share in his joy. I watched the wedding photos on social media from my apartment, seeing my son surrounded by people who loved him without reservation. David walked him down the aisle in the role that should have been Thomas's by right, but had become his through years of devoted fatherhood. The image captured the complexity of relationships built on love rather than biology. Emma became pregnant 6 months after their wedding, and Marcus called to share the news with careful excitement. I would be a grandmother, but my role in this new life remained undefined and distant. The baby would grow up hearing stories about the grandmother who'd broken the family with her lies. My legacy would be one of caution rather than love. David thrived in his new marriage, finally experiencing the trust and honesty he'd craved during our years together. Sarah appreciated his steadiness and integrity in ways I'd never been able to because of the secret I'd carried. Their children called him Dad without any confusion about biology or truth. His happiness was evident in every photo and every conversation Marcus shared with me. I eventually moved to a different state where my past couldn't follow me as easily. The job market was better, and nobody knew my story or recognized my face from old news reports. Starting over completely felt like the only way to build something resembling a normal life. The apartment I found was small but peaceful, overlooking a park where children played without knowing their grandmother's shame. Marcus graduated college with honors and started his career in engineering, following in Thomas's footsteps rather than pursuing the business degree David had always encouraged. The genetic pull toward his biological father's interest became more apparent as he aged, making my deception seem even more pointless in retrospect. He'd always been Thomas's son, regardless of who'd raised him daily. On quiet evenings, I wondered what might have been different if I'd told the truth from the beginning. Perhaps David would have still chosen to marry me and raise Marcus as his own, but with full knowledge of the situation. Maybe Marcus would have grown up knowing both his fathers without the devastating revelation that destroyed our family. The what-ifs haunted me constantly. Therapy helped me understand that my fear had driven every decision I'd made as a young pregnant woman. I'd been terrified of losing David's love and of raising a child alone in a judgmental world. The lies had seemed protective at the time, but they'd ultimately caused more pain than the truth ever could have. My good intentions had paved a road to absolute destruction. Marcus sent birth announcements when his daughter Emma Claire was born, named partly for me despite everything that had happened. The gesture felt like forgiveness, though he never said those words directly. Being included in his daughter's name suggested that someday, perhaps, we might rebuild something resembling a relationship. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in years. David became grandfather to Emma Claire with the same devotion he'd shown Marcus throughout his childhood. The little girl would grow up knowing the man who'd raised her father, creating connections that transcended biology and legal definitions. In some ways, David had gotten the family he'd always deserved, just not in the way any of us had expected. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, working with young mothers facing difficult decisions about their futures. Many carried secrets similar to mine, and I found purpose in helping them navigate their choices with more wisdom than I'd possessed at their age. My experience became a cautionary tale that helped others avoid similar mistakes. The work at the shelter connected me with other women who'd made complicated choices and faced serious consequences. We formed an unlikely support group of mothers who'd lost families through deception, addiction, or other failures. Sharing our stories helped ease the isolation that had consumed me since that graduation day when everything fell apart so publicly and completely. Years passed quietly as I built a new life far from the wreckage of my old one. Marcus and I exchanged holiday cards and occasional emails, maintaining minimal contact that felt safe for both of us. His daughter grew from baby to toddler while I remained a stranger in her life. The distance protected everyone from further disappointment and pain. David retired from his job and moved with Sarah to a warmer climate where they could enjoy their golden years together. Marcus shared updates about their travels and new adventures, painting a picture of the happiness David had found after our marriage ended. He deserved every moment of joy after the pain I'd caused him through years of deception and betrayal. Thomas remained actively involved in Marcus's life, serving as grandfather to Emma Claire alongside David in an arrangement that somehow worked for everyone involved. The little girl had multiple father figures and grandfather figures, creating the kind of extended family that might have been possible if I'd been honest from the beginning. Truth had a way of creating connection that lies could never achieve. I celebrated my 50th birthday alone in my apartment, marking the passage of time with quiet reflection rather than party planning. Half a century of life had taught me the devastating cost of dishonesty and the importance of courage in difficult moments. The lessons had come too late to save my marriage or my relationship with my son, but perhaps they could help others. Emma Claire started school, and Marcus sent photos of her first day that showed a confident little girl ready to take on the world. She had Thomas's artistic temperament and David's steady determination, plus Marcus's intelligence and curiosity. The combination of influences created a remarkable child who represented hope for future generations. She would grow up in truth rather than lies. On the 10th anniversary of that graduation day, I allowed myself to remember the life I'd lost through my own choices. The memories were painful but necessary, reminding me why honesty mattered more than comfort or convenience. That letter had destroyed everything I'd held dear, but it had also freed everyone from the prison of deception I'd created and maintained for too long. Marcus called unexpectedly one evening to tell me that Emma Claire had asked about her grandmother, Claire. The conversation was brief but warmer than usual, suggesting that time might be healing some of the wounds I'd inflicted. He didn't invite me to visit, but he didn't shut the door completely either. Small progress felt like enormous victory after years of minimal contact. I continued my work at the shelter, finding purpose in helping other women navigate the difficult choices that life presented. My story served as both warning and encouragement, showing that survival was possible even after complete family destruction. The young mothers I counseled appreciated hearing from someone who understood the weight of secrets and the price of maintaining them too long. David's health began declining as he entered his 70s, and Marcus kept me informed about major developments out of courtesy. The man who'd raised my son with such devotion deserved to age gracefully, surrounded by the family he'd chosen and who'd chosen him in return. His legacy would be one of love and integrity, everything mine was not. As I approached my own aging years, I wondered who would care for me when I could no longer care for myself. The family I'd counted on was gone, replaced by the distant politeness of a son who'd never quite forgiven me. The shelter work provided community, but it couldn't replace the deep connections I'd severed through years of deception and lies. Marcus achieved professional success that made both his fathers proud, building a career that honored the values David had instilled, and the creativity Thomas had contributed genetically. His accomplishments belonged to both men in different ways, proving that love and biology could coexist when truth provided the foundation. My contribution felt minimal and tainted by the lies that had defined his childhood. Emma Claire grew into a thoughtful teenager who questioned everything and trusted carefully, traits that would serve her well in a complicated world. She knew her family's story, including my role in it, but Marcus had presented it with fairness rather than bitterness. The next generation was growing up with wisdom earned through our family's pain and mistakes. Looking back on that graduation day when everything changed, I understood that Marcus's letter had been both destruction and liberation. The truth had ended our family as we knew it, but it had also freed everyone to build authentic relationships based on honesty rather than deception. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it costs everything you hold dear. The applause in that auditorium had died the moment Principal Henderson reached the final line of Marcus's letter, but something else had been born in that silence. Truth, painful and devastating, had finally emerged from 18 years of carefully maintained lies. The cost was everything I'd thought I wanted to protect, but the freedom was something none of us had known we needed until that moment. In the end, that graduation letter became the most important thing Marcus ever wrote. Not because it destroyed our family, but because it saved everyone from continuing to live a lie that was poisoning us all. The truth hurt more than I'd ever imagined possible, but it also offered the only path to genuine healing and authentic relationships for everyone involved. Today, 15 years later, I understand that some secrets are too heavy to carry and too toxic to maintain. The graduation day that ended everything also began the possibility of something real and honest for everyone I'd deceived. Sometimes the most devastating moments become the most necessary ones, even when the cost seems too high to bear.